Okay, we have gotten the all clear to start. The time is 2:54. In 2 hours and 15 minutes. We will hit all loss, and I will record both of those times into the chat to everyone. Judge Hauser, take it away.
All right, we have just received the message to start the trial. Let's call the case of Stevie Rogers versus Drew Mars. My name is Judge Hauser. Scoring judges, please look to the 2 buttons on the lower left of your screen. And remember to keep your audio and video off unless the bailiff tells you otherwise. You should also have your video set to hide all non-video participants. This means the only people on your screen right now are the advocates and me. Can the attorneys make their appearances, please?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff would like to introduce themselves. And good afternoon. My name is Raul Garcia, and today I'm joined with my co-counsel, Jonathan Parks.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
And collectively, we represent the plaintiff, Stevie Rogers, in today's case.
Good afternoon.
After the defense has a chance to introduce themselves, we have a few preliminary matters to attend to.
Of course. Defense?
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon. My name is Madeline Driscoll, and along with my co-counsel, Mr. Matt Bestman.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
We represent the defendant, Ms. Drew Mars.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon, everybody. Plaintiff, you said you had some pretrial matters. Go ahead.
We did. We'd actually like to begin by invoking Rule 603 and 615, which constructively swears in and sequesters all witnesses barring party representatives. In this case, Stevie Rogers will be our party representative.
So invoked.
And we'd also like to draw Your Honor's attention to stipulation number 15, I believe, which tells us that all exhibits 1 through 7 are pre-admitted. Stipulation 16.
Terrific.
And with that, we have no further pretrial matters. After opposing counsel delivers their pretrial matters, we're ready for opening statements.
Defense, anything?
Yes, Your Honor, just a couple of things. First, we'd just like to note that our party representative will be Drew Mars. She'll be with us throughout her trial today.
Of course.
And we'd also like to ask Your Honor a question. And because of the format of this trial, we'll be sharing exhibits on the screen. Before we admit those exhibits, would it be okay with Your Honor if we constructively share them on the screen outside of the vision of the jury?
Absolutely.
Yes, Your Honor. And with that, the defense is ready to go.
All right. We will now hear the opening statements from each party. Everyone should make sure they are in speaker view. That button is in the upper right corner of your screen. Attorneys, please remember to mute the audio while the other party is speaking. Plaintiff?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed? It's August 14th, 2018. A woman named Agatha Lee is getting ready for bed when suddenly she feels a pain in her chest that won't go away. It becomes harder for her to breathe, and within moments, she's dead. She dies of a heart attack. Members of the jury, this is Miss Agatha Lee. She was a writer, a grandmother who cared about her family. She was also a victim in today's case. You see, today you're going to learn that the reason why she's not here is because on August 14th, the defendant, Drew Mars, murdered her. Today, you're going to meet Drew Mars. Drew Mars was the caretaker of Miss Agatha Lee. And what you're going to learn is that the defendant, Drew Mars, was set to inherit millions from Miss Lee. But on August of 2018, something changed. Miss Lee changed her mind about who would be on her will. And when the defendants found out that she was no longer going to be on the will, the defendant laid a trap. But when the defendant laid a trap, The defendant also left a trail, members of the jury. And today we're going to ask you to follow that trail from the pharmacy to the victim's room and from the victim's room back to the defendant. Now, before I continue, I want to make something very clear. This is not a criminal trial. We're not trying to send anybody to jail today. What this is a civil suit against the defendant, Drew Mars. That means that it's your job today to determine whether it's more likely than not whether the defendant, Drew Mars, murdered Miss Lee. Members of the jury, after today's case, you're going to learn that the only person who could have murdered Miss Lee was the defendant, Miss Agatha Lee, or Drew Mars, excuse me. Now, if my co-counsel, Mr. Parse, if he could put up a timeline for the members of the jury. Now, today you're going to hear a lot of dates, a lot of events as to what happened on the days following up to her death. So I want to take it back to July 4th. That was the day that Stevie Rogers, the plaintiff, went to visit his grandmother, Miss Agatha Lee. And over the months that they lived together, they grew closer and closer. So much so that on August 14th, Miss Agatha Lee agreed to put Stevie Rogers on her will instead of the defendant. You're going to hear today that the defendant knew about that the defendant heard that conversation. And when the defendant heard about that conversation, the defendant decided to lay a trap. You're going to hear that the same day the defendant learned that she was no longer going to be on the will, she went to a pharmacy which sold chloroandramine pills. Now, you're going to hear a lot today about chloroandramine pills. Chloroandramine pills is a drug that could have caused Miss Lee to have a heart attack. Today, you're going to learn that the defendant went to the pharmacy, a pharmacy which sold those same exact pills. You're going to hear today that after the defendant heard that conversation between Stevie Rogers and Miss Agatha Lee, he heard Miss Agatha Lee try to set up an appointment for later that Friday with her attorney. And when the defendant found out that Miss Lee was going to change her will, the defendant laid a trap so that she couldn't meet with her attorney. After the defendant went to that pharmacy, later that same day, he went inside Miss Lee's room on the August the 14th, and the very next day, she was found dead in her bed, members of the jury. She died of a heart attack caused by chloroandramine pills. But that's not where the story ends, you see. You see, although the defendant went to the pharmacy and went inside her room the day before she died, you're going to hear today from the lead detective, Detective Bond, that days after she had died, they found chloroandramine pills inside the defendant's possession, inside the defendant's closet, inside a bag with the defendant's fingerprint on it. And because she had died on the 14th, she never got to see her attorney later that week. She never got to change her will. And because she never got to change her will, that's how the defendant ensured that his name would remain on that will. That's how the defendant ensured that he would receive everything. Members of the jury, the defendant laid a trap, but he also left a trail. From the pharmacy to Miss Lee's room, and from Miss Lee's room back to the defendant's closet. That's why at the end of today's case, my co-counsel, Mr. Jonathan Parks, he's going to come up before you and he's going to ask you to follow that trail. And when you do, members of the jury, it's going to lead you straight back to the defendant, Drew Mars. He's going to ask you to find Drew Mars liable for the death of Miss Lee. Thank you. Your Honor, I have nothing further.
Thank you, counsel. Defense?
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court. Look a little closer. It's August 15th, 2018. Drew Mars, a live-in caretaker for an elderly woman named Agatha Lee, wakes up early. She starts her morning just like any other. Goes for a walk, brews a pot of coffee, and then goes upstairs to wake up Miss Lee. She knocks on the bedroom door, expecting to be greeted with a big smile and a good morning, Drew, just like always, but on that morning, nothing. Drew starts to worry. She goes into the room. She sees Agatha Lee lying lifeless in her bed. Drew calls her name. She shakes her shoulders, but Miss Lee won't wake up. She won't open her eyes. There's no breathing. There's no pulse. Drew Mars breaks down in tears. She rushes to find Stevie Rogers, Miss Lee's grandson. She says, "Your grandmother's not waking up. Can you please help me? Mr. Rogers doesn't call an ambulance." Now you'll learn he calls the police. Just moments after finding out his grandmother is dead, Stevie Rogers says, "This has to be a murder. Drew Mars killed my grandmother." That's what Mr. Garcia just told you. He just stood before you and he accused Drew Mars of killing Agatha Lee. Mr. Garcia told you all about a lethal drug and a $20 million inheritance, but members of the jury, if you look a little closer at the facts today, you'll see that Mr. Garcia left out the most important part of that story. You'll see there's another person with the means, motive, and opportunity to kill Agatha Lee. Members of the jury, when you look a little closer, you'll see it was Stevie Rogers, not Drew Mars, who killed Agatha Lee. You see, just 6 months before Miss Lee died, she disinherited Stevie Rogers. Instead of leaving her $20 million estate to her grandson, Miss Lee decided to leave it to Drew Mars instead. So Stevie Rogers came up with a plan. You'll learn today that Mr. Rogers knew his grandmother was fatally allergic to that drug, chlorantramine. Stevie Rogers knew that Drew Mars gave Agatha Lee her pills every night. So Stevie Rogers knew that if he replaced one of his grandmother's pills with that lethal drug, it would look like Drew Mars had done it. And on August 14th, 2018, Mr. Rogers put that plan into action. He waited until he was all alone in Lee Manor. He snuck up to his grandmother's bedroom, swapped those pills, hired a private investigator to pin the blame on Drew Mars. And the final step of Stevie Rogers' plan, members of the jury, well, that's why we're here today. Mr. Garcia said that Mr. Rogers has sued Drew Mars under the Slayer statute. This means that he must prove by a preponderance of the evidence that Drew Mars knowingly and purposefully caused Agatha Lee's death. Oh, if Stevie Rogers meets his burden today, he gets that $20 million estate. But Mr. Rogers won't be able to meet his burden. Because despite what he wants you to think, Drew Mars is not responsible for Agatha Lee's death. And you'll actually get a chance to meet Miss Mars today. When you do, you'll see she's not the malicious, manipulative person Mr. Rogers wants you to think she is. You'll see she's a loving caretaker who wanted to do anything she could for Agatha Lee. She'll tell you how on the day Miss Lee died, she overheard a conversation between Miss Lee and Stevie Rogers. Drew Mars heard Stevie Rogers begging his grandmother for that $20 million. And you'll also hear from a man named Ryan Cabrera, Agatha Lee's biographer and friend. Mr. Cabrera spent the months before Agatha Lee's death getting to know her. He was her confidant. And his testimony today will show that the evidence supports Drew Mars's story, not Stevie Rogers. Members of the jury, what happened to Agatha Lee on August 14th is a tragedy. But Drew Mars didn't do it. When you look a little closer at the plaintiff's case today, you'll see that's true. You'll see that in order to manipulate a narrative in which he gets that $20 million, Stevie Rogers will ask you to ignore evidence. You'll see the holes in his story. That's why at the end of today's trial, we're going to ask you to find in favor of Drew Mars. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. All right, before the plaintiff calls its first witness, I will ask everyone to switch to gallery view. That button is in the upper right of your screen. This will allow you to see the attorneys and witnesses at the same time. Plaintiff, call your first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff called Stevie Rogers to the stand. May I proceed, Your Honor? Good afternoon. Could you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Good afternoon. My name is Stevie Rogers.
Could you tell us why you're here in court today?
2 years ago, my grandma was killed, and her caretaker, Drew Mars, got everything in the will, everything she owned. I'm suing Miss Mars because I believe she was the one who killed my grandma.
Well, sir, let's back up for a moment. Can you tell the jury who was your grandmother?
Agatha Lee. She was a writer. She wrote mystery novels. You might have heard of her.
Sir, is this her? Mr. Parts, if you could please pull up a photo of Miss Lee.
Yes, that's her.
Sir, I want to talk about your grandmother. Were you two close?
When I was young, we were. My parents weren't really around much, so she took care of me.
You mentioned that when you were young, you two were close. Did that change?
In high school, my parents died. She asked them to run to a store, and it was a drunk driver. I thought it was her fault. We didn't talk for a long time after that.
How long didn't you talk to her?
Long, until 2018.
Well, what changed that year?
It was the 10-year anniversary. 10 years since my parents died. I guess I was just tired of not having a family.
So what'd you do that year?
I got her address, went to her house. I remember walking up to the door for the first time. I thought, I guess I didn't know what she would do.
Well, what happened when you arrived to Miss Lee's house?
She told me I was home, and I stayed.
Sir, I want to take a moment to talk about your time with Miss Lee. Did anybody else live with her?
Yes, sir. There were 3 of us. My grandma, myself, and her caretaker, Drew Mars.
Sir, did you know who Drew Mars was before you got there?
Yes, sir. Grandma told me when we lost touch, she had put Drew in her will because of that.
Sir, would you recognize that will if I showed it to you?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Parts, could we please get the will on the screen? Sir, is this that will that you just mentioned?
Yes, sir.
Does it look fair and accurate?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, at this time, we move Exhibit 9 into evidence. A copy of the will.
Any objection?
Without objection, Your Honor.
So admitted.
Now, Mr. Rogers, did Miss Lee ever talk to you and the defendant about her will?
Yes, sir, she did.
When?
She talked to us about the will on August 14th, the morning before she died.
Can you tell us about that conversation?
Sure. We were in her study, and I saw Drew right outside the door, just sort of listening.
What did Miss Lee tell you and
Objection,
Drew
Your
Mars?
Honor, to speculation.
Please explain.
Yes, Your Honor. The witness just testified that Drew Mars was listening to this conversation. That requires him to delve into Drew Mars's mindset in order to know whether or not she was actually listening to that conversation.
Response?
Your Honor, may I respond? This witness had just explicitly told us that they saw Drew Mars listening from outside the room. That's direct knowledge as to what he directly perceived, and that's rationally based on his 5 senses. He saw the defendant listening from outside the room. It's direct perception. There's no speculation involved as to the state of mind of anybody else. It's this defendant's own perception.
Response, Your Honor.
Please.
Now, the witness can testify that he saw Drew Mars outside of the door. However, for him to take that extra step and say she was actually listening to the conversation, that's not something anyone can see. That requires him to delve into her mindset, and that's inadmissible.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Last thoughts, yes.
Your Honor, this witness isn't testifying to anything that Drew Mars was thinking, anything that Drew Mars was feeling. He's talking about what he directly saw. And what this witness told us that he directly saw was Drew Mars listening from outside the room. That directly goes to his rational-based perception of sight of what he saw on that day.
I think we can leave it as he saw Drew Mars outside the room, and we can go with that. I'll strike anything beyond that. So sustain.
Yes, Your Honor.
So, Mr. Rogers, what did Miss Lee say?
She said she was going to talk to her lawyer and write a new will. But this time with my name on it, not Drew's.
After Miss Lee announced that she was going to put your name on it and not Drew Mars, well, sir, did you see how the defendant Drew Mars reacted?
Yes, sir. Drew started to frown. Her face got kind of red. And then she told me that there was no way she was going to let that happen.
Sir, you said that she announced that change on the morning before she died. So now I'd like to focus your attention to that evening. Did you remember when Miss Lee went to bed on August 14th?
Yeah. We were watching NCIS. It was our favorite show to watch together. I believe it was until around 9:30. Then we went upstairs to go to bed.
Sir, did you see the defendant Drew Mars at all that evening?
Yes, sir. I was running downstairs to grab a quick drink, and I saw Drew go inside my grandma's room.
Sir, when you saw the defendant Drew Mars go inside your grandmother's room, did you see if Drew Mars had anything with him?
Yes, in her hand. I could see her holding something sort of small.
Your Honor, at this time, we ask to read a portion of Exhibit 2 onto the record, if we may. An autopsy report of Miss Lee, which is pre-admitted.
Any objection?
Without objection, Your Honor, the documents and evidence.
Sounds good. Go ahead.
The sole and conclusive cause of the subject's death was a fatal allergic reaction to 2 chloroandramine pills, which caused the heart of Miss Lee to stop beating. Mr. Rogers, we just heard that 2 chloroandramine pills caused the death of Miss Lee. Do you know if Drew Mars knew if Miss Lee was allergic to chloroandramine pills?
Yes, sir. Drew actually told me about the allergy a few weeks before.
And do you know if the defendant, Drew Mars, knew where she could find chloroandramine pills?
Yes, sir. Drew told me they knew where they could buy it.
Mr. Rogers, are you aware of anyone who had chloroandramine pills in their possession?
Yes, sir. I was there when the police searched our house. They found a bag filled with chloroandramine in Drew's closet.
Sir, after you saw Drew Mars go inside Miss Lee's room, did you ever see your grandmother alive again?
No.
Your Honor, I have nothing further.
Ross.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed? Mr. Rogers, I want to start by talking about why you're here today, okay?
Sure, Miss Driscoll.
Now, like you told us on direct examination, when your grandmother died, she left everything she owned to Drew Mars, right?
Yes, ma'am.
That was the rights to her book, true?
Everything, yes.
Her $20 million in cash, she left that to Drew Mars, right?
Yes, ma'am. Everything she owned.
You're suing Drew Mars, right?
Yes, ma'am.
You're suing Drew Mars under what's called the Slayer statute, right?
That's correct.
Mr. Rogers, you believe that if you prove your case today, Drew Mars won't get any of that money, right?
Yes, ma'am.
If you prove your case today, that $20 million goes to you instead, right?
Objection, Your Honor. Outside the scope of this witness's knowledge, may I be heard?
You may.
This witness, or excuse me, opposing counsel didn't ask as to this witness's knowledge. Opposing counsel explicitly asked as to what the outcome of this trial would be if the plaintiff wins this trial. That asks for a legal conclusion which this witness does not have. He's not a lawyer. He hasn't graduated from law school. That's simply outside the scope of this witness's knowledge.
Response.
Yes, Your Honor, I'm simply asking the witness for his rationally based perceptions about what this outcome of this trial will be, a lawsuit that he filed himself. Now, that's a lay witness opinion, and the witness is perfectly capable of making that opinion.
Response, Your Honor?
That's not necessary. I'm going to overrule the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Rogers, you believe that if you win this case, you get that $20 million estate instead, right?
Yes, ma'am. A portion goes to the attorneys, but I believe I get most of it.
So let's talk a little bit about money. Like you told us on direct examination, your parents died back in 2008, right?
Yeah.
They left you a trust fund, true?
Yes, ma'am.
$2 million is what they left you, right?
That's what they left me.
And you've spent the past 10 years living off of that money, right?
Yes, ma'am. That was most of what I was living off of.
You lived off of that money from 2008 to 2018, true?
True. I still have a little bit left, but that was most of what I was spending.
And you used that money to travel, right?
Yeah, I use that money for everything. Food, utilities, everything.
Now, like you told us in direct examination, for 7 of those 10 years, from 2011 and on, you didn't speak to your grandmother, right?
Not too much. I would call her occasionally. She would call me occasionally, but Nothing super official.
She would write you letters, right?
She would.
You never wrote back, did you?
No, ma'am. I don't really write letters.
And you told us you called her, but you actually only called her one time in those 7 years, right?
Yes, ma'am. I called her once. She called me a few times as well.
You didn't visit her one time, true?
No, ma'am.
But then in February of 2018, she wrote you a letter, right?
Yes, she did, about her will.
You found out she had disinherited you, right?
She took me off her will, yes.
After you received that letter, you went to visit your grandmother for the first time in 7 years, right?
Not directly, no, ma'am.
It was a few months later, right?
Yes, I got the letter in February, and I visited her in, I believe, July.
So you visited her in July, but in June of 2018, that's when your trust fund ran out, right?
Yes, ma'am, that's true.
So your trust fund ran out, and then immediately after, you went to go visit your grandmother.
No, ma'am, not immediately. About a month.
Your trust fund ran out. After your trust fund ran out, you went to go visit your grandmother for the first time in 7 years. That's true?
Ma'am, I had about $2,000 left. I still have that money, but in June, that was when I started dwindling down. I visited her in July. So yes, after, but not directly after.
So that's a yes to my question. It was after your trust fund started to run out that you visited your grandmother for the first time in 7 years.
Objection, Your Honor. Asked and answered. This witness has already answered this question.
Your Honor.
I think we made the point here. We can move on. Sustained.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, in June of 2018, you weren't the only person living at Lee Manor, right?
Correct. It was me, Drew, and my grandma.
That's right. Drew Mars was your grandmother's caretaker, right?
Yes, ma'am.
When you were living at Lee Manor, you would see some of the things Drew Mars would do for your grandmother, true?
Can you explain further?
Well, you saw Drew Mars doing her job, taking care of your grandmother, right?
Sure. I saw Drew doing her job.
One of the things you saw Drew Mars do for your grandmother was handle all of her medications, right?
Yeah, that was one of the things that she did.
You knew Drew Mars refilled your grandmother's pill organizer every single Saturday, true?
I believe so. I didn't really talk to my grandma that much about her medicine, but that seems like something Drew would do.
Well, you saw Drew Mars refill that pill organizer every single Saturday, true?
For the month I was there, yes.
You know your grandmother kept that organizer on her bedside table.
Yes.
You know she took those pills every single night, right?
I believe so. I don't sleep in her room, so I'm not 100% sure, but that's what I understood.
Well, you saw your grandmother take those pills every single night, didn't you?
I think so. There might have been some nights I wasn't there, but yes, I think for the most part.
Mr. Rogers, you also know that your grandmother was fatally allergic to a drug called chlorandramine, right?
Yes, ma'am. Drew told me about that.
You know that was an over-the-counter medication, right?
Yes.
You know you could buy it at any pharmacy at any time, right?
Sure, yes.
Mr. Rogers, you told us Drew told you about chlorandramine, but you also read about that drug somewhere else, right?
Yeah, I did some research on it.
You read about that drug in your grandmother's book, true?
Yes.
Death in a Bottle, that's what it was called?
Yes.
Now, in that book, a wealthy elderly person dies from chlorandramine poisoning, right?
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay. May I be heard? Or excuse me, more prejudicial than probative under Rule 403. May I be heard?
You can be heard on both grounds.
Sure. Now, first and foremost, this is hearsay because it's a book. It's an outside of court statement that's being offered for the truth of the matter asserted that the grandmother died of chlorandramine. But more importantly, that it's inadmissible under Rule 403 because in that book, it shows that it's in fact the caretaker who killed Miss Lee. And in fact, it's actually found that after the evidence shows it's in fact the grandson who did that. This book goes to inflame the passions of the jury to understand that it's the grandson inside that book who killed Miss Lee. That book has no bearing in today's trial. And the similarities of that book in this case are too similar for the jury to actually believe that what happened in this book is in fact what happened in today's case. In fact, if that wasn't the case, opposing counsel wouldn't even bring this up.
Response.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, the plot of this book is actually detailed in Exhibit 7, which, as opposing counsel Mr. Garcia himself mentioned in pretrial, is an exhibit that has been pre-admitted in today's case. It has already been ruled that the plot of this book is admissible, therefore the objection has no standing.
May I respond to that, Your Honor?
You may.
Your Honor, while that is true that this Exhibit 7 is in evidence, for this witness to ask about this witness's knowledge about that book goes to inflame the passions of the jury to show that because of what happened in this book is what actually happened in this case, which is the fact that the grandson murdered her grandmother. And that's what opposing counsel is showing this to prove, that it was Stevie Rogers who murdered her grandmother. That's exactly what happens in this book. And because the book is not real life, it's not evidence, it wasn't found by the detectives, it's simply a book, a fictional story. It goes to inflame the passions of the jury that this is in fact what Stevie Rogers did. It's simply not admissible under Rule 403 because it has no bearing in today's case because it's a fictional book about what this witness knew about it.
Sorry, counsel. Didn't mean to cut you off. Final thoughts.
Yes, Your Honor. The bar for Rule 403 is extremely high. It has to be substantially more prejudicial than it is probative. This testimony is certainly probative. We're talking about knowledge that a certain drug can be used as a weapon before who we are alleging committed that crime. Even more than that, Your Honor, as I stated before, this evidence is already admitted. The jury already has access to that plot. Therefore, me asking this witness about his knowledge of that book does not go to substantially inflame the passions of the jury. The members of the jury already have access to that document.
Your Honor, may I respond on those grounds?
Last chance, counsel. Yeah.
Sure, sir, the document, Your Honor, the document is already in evidence. But what opposing counsel is specifically asking is about this witness's knowledge as to that exhibit. And that's simply inadmissible because that book which compares has many similarities as to how the person died of chloroandramine and the grandson was found to be responsible. It has too many similarities with today's case. It can inflame the passions of the jury to believe it was actually the grandson who was at fault, just like it is in the book. And the book is not any evidence in today's case. In fact, the book itself says it's nonfiction. It has no bearing as to what happened. It can only inflame the passions of the jury to believe that what happened in the book is what happened in today's case. There's no other reason why opposing counsel would bring it up. It's simply inadmissible under Rule 403.
I appreciate it, counsel. I'm going to overrule. I don't think it meets the standard of 403. Counsel, keep it short, though.
Yes, Your Honor. In your grandmother's book, a wealthy person dies from chlorandramine poisoning, true?
Yes, ma'am. That's the plot of the book.
You know the caretaker is the person accused, right?
Yes, ma'am. I actually didn't finish the book, so I don't really know how it ends.
Well, you did start the book in July of 2018, right?
Yes. When I got to my grandma's house, she really wanted me to read it. So I thought that would maybe bond us a little bit.
You started reading that book a month before your grandmother died from chlorandramine poisoning, right?
Ma'am, I started reading the book when I got to my grandmother's house.
That's right. That was a month before your grandmother died from chlorandramine poisoning, true?
Yes.
You accused her caretaker, Drew Mars, right?
Ma'am, I accused the person who lived with us. It wasn't me, it wasn't her. So yes, I accused Drew. Drew was the only one left.
That's a yes to my question. You accused Drew Mars.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, I want to talk about what you did on the day your grandmother died, okay?
Sure.
It was August 14th, 2018.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, at one point in the afternoon, you were the only person at home, right?
Yes, ma'am. I was alone in the house almost every day.
You were alone in the house on August 14th for a few hours, right?
Sure. They went out to lunch, I think.
And during those few hours, you had access to your grandmother's pill organizer, right?
Well, if I went in her room, yes, but Grandma told me not to go in her room.
I'm not asking for what she told you to do. I'm asking for what you had access to. When you were the only person at home, you had access to that pill organizer, right?
Sure, I guess I could have if I wanted to, but I didn't do anything.
If you wanted to go into your grandmother's bedroom, you could have, right?
Sure, if I wanted to, but I didn't.
You also had access to Drew Mars's bedroom, right?
Again, ma'am, I don't really go in other people's rooms, but sure, if I wanted to, I don't believe it was locked. I didn't test
That's
it.
right. Well, you know Drew Mars' bedroom door doesn't actually have a lock on it, right?
I think so. I haven't really been in her room much.
You know for a fact that bedroom door doesn't have a lock on it, true?
Yes, ma'am, I think so.
You could have gone into that bedroom at any point, right?
I guess I could have. I could have gone into any room, but I mean, I watched NCIS.
If you wanted to, you could have left a black bag in Drew Mars's closet, right?
Again, ma'am, I didn't do that, but I guess I could have.
You could have left that black bag there. That's a yes.
Again, ma'am, I didn't do that, but I guess it's possible that I could have. I don't know. I don't think that.
You don't know if it's possible for you to have done that?
Ma'am, I didn't do that, so it's not possible given what actually happened, but I guess theoretically, if we were like in a book, I could have walked into a room with a bag, but that's not what happened.
Miss Rogers, the next morning you woke up around 8:30 in the morning, right?
I think so. Yeah, around 8:30.
You woke up to Drew Mars pounding on your door.
Yes, that was when I found out about my grandma.
That's right. So you rushed to your grandmother's room, right?
Yeah.
When you got there, you didn't see any blood on the floor, did you?
No, ma'am.
No scratches on your grandmother's body?
No.
No bruises?
No, she was just lying there.
That's right. She was just lying there. There were no signs of a struggle, right?
No, ma'am. She was just lying there. It looked like she was sleeping, but we couldn't wake her up.
Your grandmother was 82 years old when she died, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So, Mr. Rogers, you walked into your grandmother's room and you saw an 82-year-old woman who looked like she was sleeping with no signs of a struggle, and your first thought was, this has to be murder. Did I get that right?
Ma'am, she was healthy the day before. I've never seen something like that. I wanted them to double check that it wasn't just an accident, and it turns out I was right.
Mr. Rogers, that's a yes to my question. Your first thought when you saw your grandmother was, this has to be murder, right?
Yes, she was healthy the day before.
You called the police.
Yes, ma'am.
The police arrived about an hour later, right?
Yes, ma'am.
You talked to Detective Nora Khan, right?
Yes, ma'am.
She said, I don't know why I'm here, right?
That's what she said.
She said an old lady died in her sleep, right?
Again, that's what she said, yes.
You demanded an autopsy, true?
Ma'am, I wanted to make sure that if it was just her dying in her sleep, that we knew that for a fact. Yes, I demanded an autopsy because I cared about my grandmother. I wanted to make sure that we knew what happened.
You demanded an autopsy because you were sure your grandmother had been poisoned, right?
I thought that's what could have happened, yes.
In fact, you were so sure your grandmother was poisoned that you filed this lawsuit before you even got those autopsy results back, true?
Yes, ma'am.
You were so sure because you already knew what those results would show, right?
I was hoping it wouldn't show that, but I guess I had a hunch because you're right, it came back positive for chloroandramine.
Mr. Rogers, we're not talking about hunches here. You knew what those results would show. That's true, isn't it?
I mean, I didn't know, no. So I guess the answer is no. I didn't know, but I had a hunch, yeah.
Do you remember being deposed before today's case?
Yes.
You have a copy of your deposition in front of you, correct?
I can pull one up.
Let me know when you have that up.
Yes, ma'am, I have it up.
This is your deposition, right? What you have in front of you?
Yes, ma'am.
You were deposed on July 16th, 2020.
Yes, ma'am.
You were under oath when you were deposed, right?
Yes.
The same oath you're under today, right?
Yes, ma'am.
I'd like you to turn to page 12. That's the last page of that document, okay?
Okay, ma'am, I'm scrolling.
Let me know when you're there.
I think I'm there.
Could you please read along silently as I read aloud lines 385 to 388? When did you file this lawsuit against Mars? Answer: August 20th, 2018. Immediately after the lawyer read the will. Question: was that before or after the talk screen results? Answer: before. I already knew what that talk screen was going to show. And Your Honor, with that, we have no further questions.
Your Honor, we asked this witness to allow to answer the question that opposing counsel asked, whether that's a statement he made and whether it's along the lines of what this witness testified.
I don't think you should technically ask that question, but you're free to do so on redirect.
Sure. Mr. Rogers, Your Honor, may I proceed?
Yes, you may.
Mr. Rogers, opposing counsel just asked you whether or not you knew whether Miss Lee had an allergy. Can you tell this jury how you knew this Miss Lee had an allergy?
Yes, sir. Drew was the one who told me.
Sir,
Objection, Your Honor. Mischaracterizing the testimony, that was not my question.
Your Honor, response?
Go ahead.
I didn't ask a leading question whether it was true one way or another. I simply asked this witness how this witness knew. If opposing counsel disagrees with the answer, they're welcome to address that on recross.
Yeah, I'm going to overrule for now.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Rogers, can you tell this jury how you knew that Miss Lee had an allergy to chloroandramine?
Once again, Drew told me.
And can you tell this jury how you knew where you could find chloroandramine?
Once again, Drew told me.
And can you tell the jury who is the only person you saw enter Miss Lee's room the night before she died?
Drew, my grandma's caretaker.
Your Honor, I have nothing further.
No recross, Your Honor.
All right. This witness may be excused. Plaintiff, you may call your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, we call Max Bond to the stand. Good afternoon, sir. Can you see me and hear me all right?
I can, yes, sir.
Your Honor, may I proceed? All right. Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury, sir?
Good afternoon. My name's Max Bond. I'm an investigative consultant.
Could you tell us what that is?
Think Sherlock Holmes. I'm not a police officer, but they hire me when they hit a roadblock in a case. I also do private investigative work for individuals.
What sort of work?
A lot of it is just tracking down cheating spouses, but I also do more serious work like missing person cases and murder.
How long have you done this, sir?
Decades. A while back, I got a degree in criminology. The plan was to become a lawyer, but I was more interested in investigations than with case books. So I got my private investigator's license and I've been working ever since.
How did you become involved with this case in particular?
On August 15th, Stevie Rogers contacted me. He told me that he suspected his grandmother, the novelist Agatha Lee, had been murdered that morning.
Did you take the case?
I did. I made the drive to the Lee Manor right away.
What happened when you got to the Lee residence?
When I arrived at the residence, I found Miss Lee in her bedroom. She was dead. When the police arrived, I led them to the body.
Once the police arrived, did they take over the investigation?
No. Given my background and experience, they kept me on as a consultant. I became the point person for the investigation, and ultimately my conclusions led to Mr. Mars's arrest.
You said your conclusions led to the arrest. How do you go about forming them?
You might be familiar with the general method if you've ever seen an episode of CSI. In a potential murder case, we look for three things: motive, means, and opportunity.
I'd like to break those up for the members of the jury. Does motive mean anything unusual in the context of a police investigation?
No, sir. It means what you'd expect. Who has a reason to commit this crime?
So how do you look for that?
I interviewed Mr. Rogers and reviewed several emails on Miss Mars's computer.
Let's start with that email. Would you recognize it if I showed it to you here today?
I would.
Mr. Garcia, could we get Exhibit 13 up on the screen?
Sure.
What have I showed you there, sir?
This is that email.
Does it look to be changed or altered in any way since the last time you saw it?
No, sir.
And who's listed as the sender on that email?
That'd be Miss Mars.
Your Honor, at this time, we offer Exhibit 13 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
So admitted.
What does Ms. Mars write in this email, sir?
She says, Agatha told me she changed her will to leave everything to me. I get everything. The house, the money, everything. This is going to totally change my life.
When you spoke with Mr. Rogers, did you ask him about that will change?
I did.
What did you learn, sir?
I learned that Miss Lee was planning on changing her will to remove Miss Mars. If that happened, Miss Mars would lose the estate, millions of dollars, all of it.
Sir, does losing the estate and millions of dollars count as a motive?
It's not rocket science, sir. Yes.
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation.
No, sir.
Response, Your Honor?
Hold on, let him explain.
Yes, Your Honor. The witness just testified about a statement that the defendant allegedly heard. Now, it's fine for the witness to testify about things he knows, but for the witness to then say that was the defendant's motive or that was anybody's motive to do anything, that calls for speculation.
May I respond?
Yes.
The detective didn't state that conclusively that the defendant committed this crime and this was the reason why. He simply stated that in the context of a criminal investigation, a serious financial reward counts as a motive, a potential reason that anybody could commit a crime.
That was also the way I heard the testimony as well, counsel. So I'm going to overrule, but let's keep it vague as to that, okay?
Yes, of course, Your Honor.
All right.
Yes, Your Honor.
Once more, does losing the estate and millions of dollars, does that count as a motive for someone to commit a crime?
Yes, sir, it does.
Mr. Bond, I'd like to move on to the second part of your investigation, means. What are they?
Means are the tools used to commit a crime. In this case, we had access to the gold standard, forensic evidence.
What sort of forensic evidence are you talking about?
We received a toxicology report, lab testing results for fingerprints, and lab testing results for the chemical makeup of some pills.
Would you recognize that toxicology report if I showed it to you?
I would.
Mr. Garcia, could we get that on the screen? Is this that toxicology report, sir?
Yes, it is.
What does this say about what was found in Ms. Lee's system?
Well, Miss Lee died of an allergic reaction to chloroandramine.
If Mr. Garcia, we could take that down. Did you find any chloroandramine in Ms. Lee's residence?
Yes. We discovered a bag in Miss Mars's closet during a search conducted on August 21st. Inside it, we found a bottle containing pills that looked like chloroandramine. We immediately sent that bag and the bottle to the lab to be tested.
What were the results of the lab's analysis on the bottle?
The pills inside were chloroandramine.
What did they find on the bag?
Drew Mars's fingerprint was on the zipper.
What did that mean for your investigation, sir?
The drug that killed Miss Lee was found in a suspect's room with her fingerprint on it. That's means.
Mr. Bond, I'd like to move on to the last part of your investigation. Could you tell us what opportunity means in the context of a potential crime?
Sure. With opportunity, we are looking for any moment or window where a suspect could have committed a crime.
Did you find that Drew Mars had an opportunity to poison Ms. Lee?
Yes. Drew Mars was responsible for filling Miss Lee's weekly pill organizer and had unrestricted access to her room.
Well, sir, how does that pill organizer connect to opportunity?
It was Miss Mars's job to handle Miss Lee's medication. Miss Lee would take the pills according to which day was listed on her pill container. If Miss Mars put chloroandramine in there, Miss Lee could take them and die.
Sir, I'm showing you what's been previously marked as Exhibit 12. Mr. Garcia, can we get that on the screen? Do you recognize that, sir?
Yes, that's a photograph of the pill container we found in Miss Lee's room.
Has that photograph been changed or altered since the last time you saw it?
No.
At this time, we offer Exhibit 12 into evidence, Your Honor.
Any objection?
No objection.
Got it. Okay. Technical issues. So admitted.
Now, if Ms. Lee saw that the wrong pills were in there, would she be able to recognize that?
Actually, no. Chloroandramine is identical in appearance, size, and shape to the pills Miss Lee should have taken, an arthritis medication.
Sir, Mr. Garcia, could we get a close-up of that box labeled Wednesday? I'm showing you a close-up of that pill container. Could you tell me which of those pills were Winterin?
Yes, Winterin.
Objection, Your Honor. Improper opinion.
You may be heard.
Yes, Your Honor, this is an improper opinion and, in fact, a lack of personal knowledge. As you can see, all we have there is a grainy picture where you could barely make out some pills with colors. The witness certainly isn't a chemical expert. He isn't a pharmacist. And even if he was, there would be no way for this witness to know what pill actually is what chemical just based on this picture.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
That's simply not correct. Mr. Bond, over the course of his investigation, was informed about exactly which pills Ms. Lee took every night and told that the only two that she took twice a day were Winterin. Those were the only two identical pills in the package, and he was able to observe this up close during his investigation.
Response.
May I respond, Your Honor? Yes, Your Honor, the witness can certainly testify to that, but to testify that some of the pills in this particular container are Winterin, chloroandramine, or anything else, that's beyond this witness's knowledge. It would be an improper opinion. Obviously, it's a contested issue in this case, what pills were actually what chemical.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Final thoughts.
It's not in contention in this case whether or not Ms. Lee took a daily dose of Winterin every single night, and that's exactly what's displayed in the photograph. There are two identical purple pills which have been previously discussed as being Winterin by both Mr. Bond and Mr. Rogers.
I think without some additional foundation, I'm going to sustain the objection at this point.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Garcia, if we could take that down. Sir, I'd like to talk about Ms. Lee's medication, okay?
Okay.
What were you informed about what Ms. Lee took on a daily basis?
Objection calls for hearsay.
Response, Your Honor?
Please.
These facts, again, they're not in contention in today's case. It's well known, and the testimony of Ms. Mars will show that later on in trial, that Ms. Lee took every single night the same 4 pills. 2 of which were Winterin. That's just not a contested fact in today's case. And if opposing counsel believes it is, I'd like to hear why.
Response.
Yes, Your Honor. If they believe that they could cross-examine our client about it, then that's the time for this line of testimony. But for this witness to talk about what a pill regimen was with no personal knowledge, and then to try to use hearsay to get that personal knowledge, that's what the rule against hearsay exists to prevent.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes, please.
We're using this for its effect on his investigation, that he was informed about the pills that Ms. Lee took and subsequently conducted an analysis on Ms. Lee's pill bottle. We're not using it to show the truth of the matter asserted. Again, that's not in contention in today's case.
No, I'll admit it on that basis, not for the truth, just for the effect on the investigation.
Yes, Your Honor.
Overruled.
Now, what were you informed about, Mr. Bond, about the pills that Ms. Lee took on a daily basis?
Miss Mars herself informed me about these kind of pills that she took. I know that she took an aspirin, a vitamin pill, and 2 Winterin pills. That was the arthritis medication.
Mr. Garcia, could we get that picture up again? Mr. Garcia, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm on my way.
It's okay, Mr. Garcia. We can just proceed with the examination. So how many pills of Winterin did she take on a daily basis, sir?
2.
Did you find any evidence that the defendant switched those 2 Winterin pills out for chloroandramine?
Yes. A lab test revealed Miss Mars's fingerprints on exactly 2 of the Winterin pills in Miss Lee's pill bottle.
Thank you, sir. Nothing further at this time.
Cross.
Now, Mr. Bond, I'd like to talk a little bit about what a normal investigation looks like, okay?
Okay.
Investigations are typically conducted by the police, right?
Certainly.
We all hope that the police aren't biased, right?
Right.
It would be very improper for one person to pay the police that's investigating their case, right?
Well, yeah, considering the police are actually public employees, they have a little bit of a different job.
Yeah, that's right. If I paid a police officer who was investigating a crime I was involved in, that would be very improper, right?
Right, because the police are already salaried.
But sir, you said you were the lead on this case. Isn't that true?
Right, I was a private investigator. I investigated with the police.
You are paid by one party in this case.
Yes, sir, by Stevie Rogers.
Now, you actually knew Stevie Rogers before this case ever got underway. Isn't that right?
I did. He contacted me in July, I think.
You had already made money from your relationship with Stevie Rogers before this case even started.
Yes, sir.
You had already made $10,000. Isn't that right?
Yes, sir, to find Miss Lee's address for him.
And in this case, Stevie Rogers has promised you $25,000. Did I get that correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
You want to be paid that $25,000, don't you?
Sure.
You haven't been paid that $25,000 yet. Isn't that right?
That's correct. Yes, sir.
As you sit there and testify in front of Stevie Rogers, you're still waiting for Stevie Rogers to give you that money.
That's usually what happens in business. You usually perform a service and then you're paid for it afterwards. Yes, sir.
So this testimony, this is just part of the service that you're getting that $25,000 for. Is that what you mean?
I do have to testify. Yes, sir.
So let's talk a little bit about the case. Now, when Stevie Rogers called you, he didn't say, my grandmother was killed. Can you check if it was natural causes? Did he?
No, generally people think their grandmother was killed. They don't believe it was natural causes.
That's right. Stevie Rogers right away said, my grandmother was murdered. I'm sure of it.
That's right. Yes, sir.
Now, when you got on the scene, you saw an older woman in her bed. Isn't that right?
She was.
You're a trained investigator, aren't you?
Yes, sir.
You've done other death investigations before.
Many.
And at first, it just looked like natural causes to you. Isn't that right?
That's correct. But one of the most important rules of private investigating, never assume anything.
The police were on the scene as well. Isn't that right?
Yes, sir.
It was a detective, Nora Khan.
Correct.
You know that Nora Khan is the chief of the Major Crimes Unit.
Yes, sir.
You read her report.
I did.
So you know that Nora Khan initially concluded it was probably just natural causes as well.
Yes, sir. But thankfully, we investigated further and found that wasn't the case.
There was only one person in that room who said they already knew it was murder, right?
Yes, Mr. Rogers.
And so that's not all Mr. Rogers said he already knew, right?
That's correct.
This was before the toxicology report came back. Isn't that true?
Right.
This was before the autopsy showed that the death was caused by chloroandramine.
Yes.
But Stevie Rogers already said, Detective Kahn, why don't you take a picture of that pill organizer?
Yeah, we did take a picture of that.
Well, you didn't just take a picture. You took a picture at Stevie Rogers' insistence. Isn't that true?
That's correct. Yes,
That's the picture you just showed us.
it is.
But you still think that it's the forensic evidence that proves that only Drew Mars could have committed this crime.
Yeah, that's one part of it.
Sir, have you ever heard the term planting evidence before?
I have.
You know, that happens sometimes.
Certainly, in rare cases, that's very unfortunate.
If somebody put a murder weapon in a bag in somebody else's closet, that's an example of planting evidence, right?
Yes, sir.
As an investigator, it's an important part of your job to make sure that's not what happened.
Yes, sir.
But you couldn't rule out that possibility today, could you?
I can't rule that out, but the fingerprint evidence does point to Drew Mars being the person that touched that bag last.
So let's dive into that fingerprint evidence. First of all, it wasn't you who did the analysis, right?
That's correct. It was the trained detective, Nora Khan, that did that.
And you know, all the trained detective found was one partial fingerprint, right?
Correct, right on the zipper.
Now, there were other unusable fingerprints on that bag.
Yes,
But of course, since they're unusable prints, you weren't able to test those.
yeah, that's correct.
If you weren't able to test them, you don't know who they belong to.
That's correct.
And so what matters a lot more than the bag is the pills inside the bag. You'd agree with that, wouldn't you?
Sure.
You tested the pill bottle too, right?
We did, yes, sir.
There were fingerprints on that bottle.
No, sir. They were all smudged up, so no usable fingerprints on the bottle.
Right, no usable prints, but there were prints.
Right.
And since they weren't usable, you can't tell us that those fingerprints matched to Drew Mars.
That's correct. Yes, sir.
You can't tell us if those fingerprints would match to Stevie Rogers.
That's correct.
Nothing further.
Redirect.
Your Honor, I don't have a redirect examination. However, I would like to read one of the pretrial orders onto the record.
Any objection?
That'd be number 20.
Just let me get the order up, Your Honor.
All right.
No objection.
All right, go ahead, counsel.
Through no fault of either party, Detective Nora Khan is unavailable within the meaning of the Midlands Rules of Evidence. With that, we close our case in chief.
I appreciate it, counsel. We will now take a 5-minute break. Judges, please remember that this video is being publicly broadcast via YouTube live stream. I will see you all in 5 minutes.
Competitors, I'm going to go ahead and send you to your breakout rooms, and in about 5 minutes, I will prompt you to return to this main room. am merging the student competitors back into the judges room. Judges, if you would turn on your video or send me a direct message to confirm that you are sitting back at your computer. Okay. Ethan, I've got you. Claudia, I've got you. Brittany, I've got you. Emily, you're good. Let's see. Mario, you're good. I'm still waiting on confirmation from Judge Brian Dorfman. Brian, if you are in the room, if you would send me either a chat. Great, he's here. Okay. Judge Hauser, we're ready to proceed.
Everybody's back. We're ready to go. Defense, please call your first witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. The defense calls Drew Mars.
You may proceed when you're ready.
Ma'am, could you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Hi, my name is Drew Mars.
Do you know why you're here today?
Yes, Stevie Rogers is accusing me of killing Agatha Lee.
Did you?
No, absolutely not. I could never even imagine doing something like that. Agatha really meant the world to me.
I want the jury to understand that relationship. When did you first meet Agatha Lee?
Back in 2008, I was in college for nursing and was actually hired as Agatha's assistant caretaker. And right after I graduated, I was hired on as her full-time caretaker.
Did you live with Agatha?
Yeah, I lived with her in Lee Manor for the 10 years that I took care of her.
What was a typical day in your job like?
I would prepare her medications. I checked her health every day, just things that a typical nurse would do. But then I also did things like clean up around the house, cook dinner, just whatever needed to be done, really.
How was your relationship with her?
It was great. Even though it was technically my job to take care of her, I always kind of felt like she was taking care of me too. I learned so much from her in those 10 years that I was with her, and she really became a role model and a mentor to me.
Did you spend a lot of time with her?
Oh yeah. Agatha and I always kind of joked that we didn't have any friends our own age, but hey, that was fine with us. We would talk, read, watch movies. We watched Wheel of Fortune almost every single night without fail. It was a lot of fun, and I wouldn't have wanted to be anywhere else.
You mentioned that you live with Miss Lee. Did you live in that house for free?
Yeah, I did.
Were you compensated any other way?
Yeah, I was. I was actually paid a salary. It went up a little bit every year, but my last year working there, it was $80,000 a year.
Did you feel comfortable in that salary?
Oh yeah, definitely. Agatha was really generous with me. I never really needed anything else.
So then did you ever talk to Miss Lee about money?
Not really. The only time I remember talking about money was when she showed me her will in 2018.
What did you understand that will to mean?
That when Agatha passed away, I would get everything that she owned.
How did you react?
I mean, of course I was grateful for it, but honestly, the thought of having tens of millions of dollars was kind of overwhelming. So I just tried to keep living as normally as I could.
Did that ever change?
Yeah, things definitely changed when Stevie came to Lee Manor.
Who's Stevie?
Stevie is Agatha's grandson.
When did you first meet him?
Back in 2008, actually. He had stayed with her for about a month over that summer.
And when did you hear from him next?
10 years later, July 4th of 2018.
How did Miss Lee react when her grandson showed up?
I mean, she seemed completely floored. She was speechless, really.
Did Stevie ever tell you why he came to visit?
No, he didn't give a reason.
And how long did he stay?
Weeks. He was there until long after Agatha passed away.
Now, I want to talk a little bit more about that will you mentioned. Were you in court today when the plaintiff testified about a conversation he had with Miss Lee on August 14th?
Yeah, I was. I heard him say that Agatha had told him that she was putting him back into the will.
Did you ever hear Agatha say anything like that?
No, I actually heard Agatha say the exact opposite that day.
What do you mean?
Well, I was coming to deliver tea to Agatha's room when I heard her and Stevie talking about her will.
What did you hear?
I heard Stevie say, "I know you cut me out of the will, but I really hope that you'll reconsider because I've shown myself to be devoted to you."
What happened next?
Agatha said no, and then they walked into the sitting area together. Agatha.
Your Honor, objection, Your Honor, hearsay to Miss Lee's statements.
Response.
Yes, Your Honor. Plaintiff's counsel opened the door to these statements when they talked about the same conversation on the direct examination of their party. At this point, these statements come in for impeachment purposes instead of the truth of the matter asserted to show that their party misrepresented that conversation.
Your Honor, may I be heard? Your Honor, these statements are explicitly being offered for the truth of the matter asserted that Miss Lee had in fact said no. Now, there's no sworn testimony here that can be used to impeachment purposes under Rule 801. Opposing counsel is explicitly using this testimony that the defendant heard not to impeach anybody, but for this witness's own truth of the matter asserted that Miss Lee had said no. That's directly under Rule 8 hearsay. It's being offered for the truth of what Miss Lee had in fact said.
May I respond, Your Honor?
That's unnecessary. I'm going to overrule.
Yes, Your Honor.
So, ma'am, you were telling us how Agatha Lee responded to Stevie Rogers' request to be put back in the will?
Yeah, Agatha said no, and then they walked into the sitting area together. Agatha headed downstairs to go to lunch with her friend, and Stevie was just glaring at me.
Did he say anything?
Yeah, he looked me dead in the eye, and he said, "Don't count your millions yet."
Miss Mars, what day did all of this happen?
On August 14th. It was the day that Agatha passed away.
I have to ask you a few more questions about that day. You said that you took Agatha to lunch. When did the two of you get back?
About 2 p.m.
Who was home?
Just me, Stevie, and Agatha.
What did you and Agatha do?
Well, Agatha took a nap when we got home, but I came into her room around 6:30 to bring her dinner. I just asked how she was doing and how her lunch went. That was the last time I actually saw her alive. I wish I would have said more to her.
What happened the next morning?
I woke up around 7 in the morning to get an early walk-in. And then I got home and made some orange tea for Agatha. It was her favorite kind. And so I went up to her room to give it to her. And normally when I'd open the door, she'd say good morning or ask how I was doing, but there was nothing that time. So I knew right away that something was wrong.
What happened next?
I went up to her bed and I put my hand on her shoulder and just kind of tapped her a little bit, and she wouldn't move. So I checked her pulse, and nothing. That's when I realized she was gone. I couldn't believe it.
What'd you do?
The first thing I did was go into Stevie's room and tell him what happened. I could barely get it out. I was completely shocked.
What did Stevie do?
Within seconds of me coming in there, he called the police and called a private investigator. And just minutes later, they were at the house, and Stevie was saying that Agatha's death was a murder. It just all happened so fast.
What happened next?
A few days later, we all had to come back so that Agatha's lawyer could read her will and say what I would be inheriting.
How did you react?
I said that I had no idea.
Was that true?
No, I knew what was in the will.
Well, if you knew what was in the will, why did you say you had no idea what you'd be inheriting?
I didn't want it to look like I had some sort of motive to kill Agatha. I mean, Stevie had just hired a private investigator. I knew what he was doing. I was terrified. I felt like I was being framed, and there was nothing that I could do to stop it. So I tried to do the only thing that I could think of.
Did it work?
No, I was arrested for killing Agatha the very next day. I can't even comprehend doing something like that.
Thank you, Miss Mars. No further questions, Your Honor.
Your Honor, at this time, we re-raise our objection to what Miss Agatha Lead said on August 14th. If I may please be heard.
You may.
Now, under Rule 801, on declarant witness's prior statement, an inconsistent statement, which is the exception that opposing counsel raised, it says that the inconsistent statement has to be under the penalty of perjury at a trial hearing or the proceeding or in a deposition. We have heard no evidence that what Miss Lee told this witness that she, in fact, wasn't going to change her mind was under a penalty of perjury, was at a trial or in a deposition. We haven't heard any testimony that what Miss Lee said was actually under oath. And because of that, the inconsistent statement exception doesn't apply under Rule 801 D1A or D1B, excuse me.
Responsible.
Your Honor, if I may, the 801 D1B exception only comes into play when you're talking about impeaching the witness you're examining with their past statements. You can impeach the credibility of another witness with any admissible evidence. This is the same argument we already have. The ruling should be the same.
Response, Your Honor?
Yeah, final thoughts.
And now opposing counsel said what he should be able to do, but he didn't mention a rule. The only rule that we have here with us in court today is Rule 801 D1B, which says that it has to be under under the penalty of perjury, a hearing or other proceeding under Rule 801 DA. Because this witness, Miss Lee, was not under oath, we simply don't know whether it follows any of those conditions, and therefore it can't be an inconsistent statement, and that exception cannot be applied to what Miss Lee said on August 14th.
If I may, Your Honor?
Yes.
If the court interprets 801 D1B to apply here, then it would actually be the rule that gets us out of this objection, because this witness's testimony is under oath. This is sworn testimony used to impeach the credibility of another witness. But frankly, we don't need to go into the 801D exceptions. It's just not for the truth of the matter asserted because it's being used for impeachment purposes.
Your Honor, may I respond to that?
No, we're gonna leave these statements admitted. Right now, it sounds like we've got two different conversations. The defense is saying one thing, the plaintiff saying the other. We're gonna leave it to the jury.
Sure. Your Honor, may I proceed with cross-examination?
You may.
Good evening, Ms. Mars. My name is Raul Garcia. Can you see and hear me okay?
Yeah, thank you.
I want to begin by talking about your relationship with Miss Lee. Now, you began working for her all the way back in February of 2008. Is that right?
That's right.
You lived with Miss Lee as her caretaker. Is that right?
Yes.
And after 10 years of living with her and spending time with her, she did something special for you, didn't she?
What do you mean?
Well, ma'am, she wrote you down as the sole inheritor on her will. Isn't that true?
Yeah, that's true.
And now you understood this to mean that if Miss Lee were to die, you would receive everything that's on that will. Isn't that true?
Yeah.
Well, man, when Miss Lee wrote you down onto her will, your family needed money. Isn't that true?
Yeah, I mean, they had never been particularly wealthy.
And after working for Miss Lee for 10 years, you only had $20,000 in savings. Isn't that true?
Yeah, that was all I needed, really. I mean, I was living there for free. I didn't have to buy any of my food. I gave my extra money to my family.
And so after giving all that extra money to your family, you only had $20,000 left, right, in your savings account?
Yeah, that was more than enough for me.
Well, then let's talk about what you stood to gain by staying in that will. Mr. Cooper, could you please pull up Exhibit 4? Or Mr. Parks, excuse me. Now, Miss Mars, you recognize that, don't you?
Yeah, that's Lee Manor.
You would agree with me that if Miss Lee died with you in that will, you would get that house, wouldn't you?
Yeah,
And on top of that house, you would get her car, right?
I think so.
Not only that, on top of that, you would get an additional $20 million in cash, wouldn't you?
Yeah, that was all in the will.
But if Miss Lee had died without you on that will, well, that means that you would only have $20,000 left in your savings, right?
Yeah, that's true.
And with all that money on the line, well, something changed in July, right? July of 2018.
What do you mean?
Oh, well, in July of 2018, that's when her grandson, Stevie Rogers, came to visit, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And after Stevie Rogers came to visit, well, you would see Stevie Rogers and Miss Lee spend a lot of time together, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
And you would see Stevie Rogers and Miss Lee grow closer and closer over time.
Yeah, it was nice to see, honestly.
In fact, when Stevie Rogers was there, you would describe Miss Lee as happy, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
In fact, you would describe her as the happiest you've ever seen her be in the last 10 years that you lived with her. Isn't that true?
Yeah, I knew that she missed her grandson a lot, so I was really glad to see them together.
So I want to draw your attention to August. Now, after they'd been growing closer for several weeks, you overheard them talking on August 14th, right?
Yeah.
You overheard them talking about a will, right?
That's right.
They were discussing whether or not to put Stevie Rogers back on that will. Isn't that true?
Yes.
Now, just to be clear, Miss Mars, you weren't in that room, were you?
No, I was just right outside.
But Stevie Rogers, well, he was inside that room, right?
Yeah, he was with Agatha.
And you told us on direct that she had in fact told Stevie Rogers no, that she wasn't going to put him on her will. Is that right?
Right.
But you have no evidence that that's exactly what she said, do you?
Well, I'm telling you that right now.
Well, you have no audio recording that that's exactly what she said, do you?
No.
You have no notes that that's exactly what she said, do you?
No, that's why I'm telling you now.
Well, just to be clear, after that conversation between Miss Lee and Stevie Rogers about her will, you actually heard her make a phone call. Is that right?
Yeah.
You heard her make a phone call with someone who you believe to be her attorney. Isn't that true?
I think so. Their name was Kirby, and I knew that was her attorney's name too.
Not just any attorney. That was the attorney's name who handled her will, right?
Yeah.
You heard Miss Lee tell the lawyer that she wanted to make an appointment for later that same week. Isn't that true?
Yeah.
But Miss Mars, you knew how to make sure that that didn't happen. Isn't that true?
What are you talking about?
Well, I want to talk about you and Miss Lee's death. You're aware that she had died of chloroandramine pills. Isn't that true?
Yes.
Miss Mars, the police found a bottle of chloroandramine pills inside your room. Isn't that true?
Yes.
They found a black bag inside your closet, right?
Yes. I did not put that there.
But just to be clear, that black bag that they found inside your closet, it had drugs inside of them, didn't it?
I think so.
Mr. Parts, if we could please get Exhibit 14 up on the screen. Miss Lee, you recognize that closet, don't you?
Yeah.
Mr. Parts, if you could please zoom in. You see that black bag there, don't you?
Yeah.
That was the black bag with chloroandramine pills inside of them. Isn't that true?
That's right.
And just to be clear for the members of the jury, when the police found that black bag, they found your fingerprints on it, didn't they?
I'm not sure exactly, but I never put that bag there. Maybe I touched it when I was going around the other things in the closet or looking in the closet, but I did not put it there.
Well, you were in court today when Detective Bond testified, right?
Yes.
And you were in court today when Detective Bond told us that they found your fingerprint on the zipper of that black bag, didn't he?
Yeah. Again, I must have touched it somehow, but I did not put it there.
Well, I want to talk about why you're telling us that here in court today. Now, you're aware that Miss Lee, she had an allergy to chloroandramine. Is that right?
Yeah, she was deathly allergic to it. That's why we made sure never to keep it in the house.
Well, Miss Mars, you knew that chloroandramine could cause her to have a heart attack. Isn't that true?
Yes. Yes.
Not only that, but you knew that chloroandramine was identical to the pills that Miss Lee was prescribed, didn't you?
Yes, they were identical to Winterin pills.
Well, not only did you know that she was allergic to chloroandramine, you also knew where you could find it. Isn't that true?
Sure, it could be found anywhere, really. It was an over-the-counter medication.
That's right. You could purchase chloroandramine at any pharmacy in Midlands, couldn't you?
Yeah.
So I want to talk about what you did after you heard Miss Lee tell her attorney that she wanted to make a meeting for later that week. Because the truth is, after you heard her make it that phone call, you went to a pharmacy.
Objection, Your Honor. Objection, Your Honor. Time has elapsed.
Your Honor, I believe that when time has elapsed, the witness is allowed to answer the question. I'm just not allowed to ask anymore, but this witness is allowed to answer my question.
Yeah, I'm good with that, actually.
That's fine, Your Honor.
Yeah.
I'll just repeat it just for the sake of the jury understanding what I asked. After you heard her talk to her attorney about meeting them later that same week, you went to a pharmacy, didn't you?
Yeah, it was a routine visit.
Your Honor, I have nothing further.
Redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor. May the witness be excused?
She may. Thank you. Defense have anything further?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Mr. Ryan Cabrera to the stand.
All right. You may proceed when you're ready.
Mr. Cabrera, could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Hi, how you doing? I'm Ryan Romano Cabrera, but my friends call me Cabby. Miss Driscoll, feel free.
What do you do for a living?
I'm an investigator into and a commentator on the lives of the rich and famous.
How'd you get into that line of work?
Well, I guess you could say it's a family business. My uncle Chi-Chi was Joe Pesci's stunt double and my cousin Vinny. I tried my own hand at acting, but I was worse than Shaq in Air Bud's seventh inning fetch, so I decided to do biography.
Who have you written biographies about?
Let's see. Pancho Villa, Josh Groban, the cast of The Brady Bunch, and Agatha Lee.
I want to talk a little bit about Agatha Lee. When did you start working with her?
Well, I started gunning for that story in 2015. You see, Aggie, that's what I called her, she wrote a mystery bigger than Scooby-Doo, then just kind of went reclusive. After 3 years of email pestering, Aggie bit the bait and we started having sit-downs to discuss her life and work.
What was your work with Miss Lee like?
Well, it started more as interviewing, but pretty quickly just turned into very delightful conversation.
Mr. Cabrera, you mentioned that you would see Miss Lee a few times a week. Where would you normally meet?
Usually it was at Aggie's humongo house in Midlands. They called it Lee Manor.
And when you were at Lee Manor, did you ever see anyone else there?
Yeah, it was only a couple of folks. It was Drew Mars and Stevie Rogers.
Let's start with Drew Mars. Who was she?
Miss Mars was a live-in nurse and daily companion of Aggie's for many, many years.
From what you saw during your time at Lee Manor, what was the relationship between Drew Mars and Agatha Lee like?
I mean, it was like Madonna with a mirror. The two of them were inseparable. Drew was always taking care of Aggie when I was around.
Let's talk about Stevie Rogers. Who was he?
Madon, technically speaking, Stevie was Aggie's grandson.
Did Miss Lee ever talk to you about Stevie Rogers?
Indeed, she did.
What did she say?
I mean, it broke my itty-bitty heart. Aggie said Stevie never called, never wrote, never visited. I mean, Stevie was her only living family. I can't imagine.
Did Agatha Lee tell you how she felt about that?
Yeah, she said she felt abandoned, that it really broke her up. Aggie actually told me she planned to change her will because of it.
Did you ever see that will?
Indeed, I did.
Would you recognize it if I showed it to you today?
I think I would, yeah.
Mr. Bestman, could we get Exhibit 9 on the screen? Is this that will you mentioned?
Yes, it is.
Does it appear to be a fair and accurate copy of that will?
It looks like it, Miss Driscoll.
Has it been changed since the last time you saw it?
No, I don't think so.
The defense offers Exhibit 9.
It's my understanding that this is already in evidence, but we don't have any objection if it's not.
Oh, I apologize. I believe it was Exhibit 8 that was entered. It must be my mistake, Your Honor.
If it hasn't been admitted, it's admitted now.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Cabrera, what did you learn from this will?
Well, you know, it kind of reaffirmed the kind of stuff Aggie was saying to me about Stevie.
What did it say specifically about Stevie Rogers?
Well, it says, I specifically intend to exclude my grandchild Stevie Rogers from receiving any benefit from my estate or under this will.
Does this will say who Agatha Lee would be leaving her estate to?
All of it to Drew Mars.
Mr. Cabrera, did you ever see how Stevie Rogers interacted with his grandmother?
You know, not really. Stevie wasn't around till about a month before Aggie bit the dust.
Did you ever talk to Miss Lee about her relationship with Mr. Rogers after he came back?
Yeah, we had lunch shortly thereafter, and we chatted a little bit about Stevie.
What did Miss Lee say?
Aggie seemed really down. I asked if everything was okay, and Aggie just said, I hope I made the right decision. I hope Stevie will forgive me.
Objection, Your Honor, to hearsay.
Response?
Please.
Yes, Your Honor, these statements actually fall under an exception to hearsay. That's Rule 8033, then existing emotional state and mental state. These statements that Mr. Cabrera just said were, I hope I made the right decision. I hope Stevie will forgive me. Now hope that's then existing emotional and mental state.
Your Honor, may I respond?
You may.
They also contain statements of memory about a conversation that was had earlier with the plaintiff, in this case, Stevie Rogers. They're using these statements to assert a truth that Ms. Agatha Lee spoke to Mr. Rogers earlier in the day about that will and decided not to change it. They're using it for that truth contained.
Response, Your Honor? The statements that Mr. Cabrera just stated actually make no explicit mention of a will, no explicit mention of a conversation from earlier that day. The statements were, I hope I made the right decision. I hope Stevie will forgive me. Now, we are absolutely using those statements for the truth of the matter asserted, but that's allowed under Rule 8033.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Final thoughts, yes.
Your Honor, we believe that truth contained about the earlier conversation, this is a discussion that happened on August 14th, can't be extricated from the statements of memory regarding the conversation earlier. Simply the statement, I hope Stevie will forgive me, is admissible, but the prior statement about I hope I made the right decision in the past, that's not admissible.
I'm going to overrule.
Yes,
Yes, Your Honor. Now, when Agatha Lee told you, I hope Stevie will forgive me, what day was that?
That was August 14th, 2018. That was the day before Aggie died.
Well, the next day, August 15th. How did that day begin?
Like any other Wednesday, I got my mani-pedi, I took my dog to therapy, and I soaked in some sun. It was a very nice day until Drew called.
What happened on that phone call?
I could hardly make out anything Drew was saying on that call. And then I heard at one point she said that Aggie had passed away.
Did you talk to Miss Mars after that phone call?
Yes, I was at the estate for the will reading and for some of the police investigation.
Could you tell the members of the jury a little bit about what you saw from that investigation?
Sure. There were the regular old suits, and then this other guy named Bond. I think he took his 007 connection a little too seriously because he wouldn't stop pacing around making all these remarks.
What do you mean, remarks?
I mean, it was like an M. Night Shyamalan script. He was crafting all these crazy conspiracy theories about Aggie's death right off the bat. I mean, Bond accused Drew of killing Aggie before the coffee even got cold.
What day was that?
Objection, Your Honor, as to improper opinion, may I be heard?
You may.
This is to the prior statement about all the crazy theories that Bond was proposing. This witness isn't an investigator, and for him to characterize theories about an investigation as plausible or implausible is improper.
Response, Your Honor?
Please.
The witness is testifying about his perceptions of this investigation. He's telling the members of the jury what he saw happening, and he's perfectly allowed to make those conclusions.
May I respond, Your Honor?
You may.
The witness can testify about his perception if it doesn't break another rule, which it does in this case, the rule against an improper opinion by a lay witness. He's characterizing the investigation by Max Bond, and the defense is using this to try to cast doubt on Mr. Bond's conclusions.
I'll strike the word crazy. I'll sustain the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. To be clear, the word conspiracy theory, that's still on the record? And what day was that Drew or Mr. Bond accused Drew Mars of murder?
That was August 22nd.
And when did the police arrest Drew Mars?
It was the very next day.
Thank you, Mr. Cabrera. Your Honor, at this time, I have nothing further.
You may proceed with cross when you're ready, counsel.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Cabrera, can you see and hear me all right?
I can indeed.
All right. Now, I'd like to talk about something Agatha Lee said during that conversation you talked about on August 14th, okay?
Okay, let's do it.
That was the day before she died, right?
Correct.
You had a lunch meeting with her.
Yeah, we were chatting a little bit about Stevie. She was gloomy. I was trying to pick her brain a little bit, you know?
Yeah, and at the end of your conversation, you actually asked to set up another meeting, right?
Yeah, that's true.
For just 3 days later, that Friday.
Yeah, it was pretty routine for us to meet every few days, milk and cookies, you know, the whole thing.
She told you though that she couldn't actually go to that meeting, right?
Yeah,
She told you that she had set up a meeting with her attorney, right?
as one does.
The same attorney that read her will. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess she only had one attorney. That makes sense to me.
Well, Mr. Cabrera, I'd like to move on to that will reading. Did you go?
I did.
Well, Ms. Mars, she was there too, right?
She was.
At that will reading, Ms. Mars' behavior, it seemed a little strange to you, right?
What do you mean?
Well, you noticed that Ms. Mars was acting very surprised by the news that she was inheriting Ms. Lee's estate, right?
Yeah, she looked a little bit uncomfortable with all the eyes kind of right at her. I don't really get that. I would love the attention if I were her, but so it goes.
Now, Mr. Cabrera, she didn't just look uncomfortable. She said some things too, right?
Yeah,
Multiple times she repeated the words, "I can't believe it. I had no idea." Isn't that right?
yeah, that's right.
Now, Mr. Cabrera, that was strange to you because you knew Ms. Mars had been told about the inheritance, right?
Yeah, I thought that was weird. I guess she was just uncomfortable with how we were all staring at her. I don't know.
Your Honor, I move to strike the last portion of that testimony about I guess she was just uncomfortable as speculation.
Care to respond?
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Parts opened the door to that response when he asked the question about Mr. Cabrera's perceptions of the situation. The witness is simply answering what Mr. Parts asked. It's not speculation. He's giving what he perceived.
May I respond briefly?
Yes.
My question was that appeared strange because earlier he had been at a location where Ms. Mars had been informed about this. The response to the question was yes, he had been at a location where she had been informed about this.
May I respond, Your Honor?
No, I'll just strike it. Let's keep going.
Yes, Your Honor.
You had actually interacted with Ms. Lee and Ms. Mars a few months earlier, right?
Yeah, like I said, I was with Aggie every few days.
And Ms. Lee had talked about how she was willing everything to Drew Mars, right?
Right.
Now, I'd like to finish off by talking about that statement you said about Stevie Rogers, okay?
Which one, about Stevie coming for the money or what?
Earlier, you said that Stevie Rogers, that Ms. Lee said she hoped Stevie would forgive her. Isn't that right?
Yeah, that's right.
That was on August 14th.
Yeah.
Now, sir, I'd like to talk about what you stand to gain if the defense wins this case, okay?
Oh, okay.
Now, you actually stand to gain quite a bit of money if the defense wins, right?
I'm not sure what you're talking about.
Sir, is it your testimony, yes or no, that you stand to gain what could be millions of dollars if the defense wins this case?
Are you talking about Drew Mars giving me the books that Aggie had written?
Is that a yes or a no to my question, sir?
Well, I just don't know what money you're referring to.
I'm just asking, sir, just a yes or no. Is it your understanding that you stand to gain millions of dollars?
Yeah, so Drew Mars said that if she had access to Aggie's unpublished books, she would let me get a read. And, Aggie's such a great writer. I thought those could be worth a lot.
When Ms. Mars asked you to come and testify, you asked for something too.
Yeah, I like I said, I wanted to read the books.
Like you just said, you knew that Ms. Lee had a private book collection of unpublished novels.
Yeah, I really wanted to take a read.
Well, let's talk about how much that collection might be worth. Ms. Lee has published one book in her entire life, right?
That's correct.
She has sold tens of millions of copies of that book, right?
Yes, I just published my first romance novel, and I'm hoping for similar fate. Aggie really rubbed off on me.
She has made millions of dollars off that one book.
That's true.
And it's your understanding that she's America's most famous mystery author, right?
Yeah, like I said, Aggie, what she did was bigger than Scooby-Doo.
Now, if the defense wins this trial, sir, you would gain the rights to that entire collection of unpublished novels.
Well, I don't know that for sure. Drew just said I could have a look at the books and maybe keep them, but I don't really know what I do with them. Maybe just improve my biography, really honor Aggie.
Sir, he told you specifically that he would give you the books to keep. Isn't that right?
Yeah, but like I said, I don't really know what I would do with them.
All right, sir. No further questions, Your Honor.
Redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor. I ask that Mr. Cabrera be excused.
He may be excused. All right.
And Your Honor, with that, the defense rests its case in chief.
Terrific. We will now hear closing arguments from each party. Everyone should please switch back to speaker view. And the plaintiff may proceed when they are ready.
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court, Mr. Bestman, members of the jury. We have been in court today for one reason: to determine who killed Agatha Lee. On August 14th, Ms. Lee, she went to go to bed. She had just spent an evening with her only grandson. She felt safe. What Ms. Lee didn't know was that she had been poisoned by the defendant, the woman whose job was to protect Ms. Lee. You see, the evidence has shown that the defendant, Ms. Lee's caretaker, Drew Mars, knew she was about to get cut out of Ms. Lee's will. Her time was running out, and so she made a choice. A selfless and a senseless choice to poison Ms. Lee through her own medication. Members of the jury, the defendant laid a trap, but she left a trail of evidence. In this trial, it was our job as the plaintiff to prove to you that the defendant killed Ms. Lee. We have brought suit against Ms. Mars under what's called the Slayer statute. Now, before closings, the judge just told you that that law says something that's pretty common sense. If you kill another person, you don't get to inherit anything from them. We had to prove to you that the defendant killed Ms. Mars by a preponderance of the evidence. That's just more likely than not. That means that if you find it a hair more likely that the evidence in this case has shown that the defendant committed this crime, the law requires that you find in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Rogers. And the evidence in this case has shown that the defendant had access, she had motive, and all the forensic evidence in this case points straight back to her. It was the defendant who laid a trap to kill Ms. Lee, but left a trail of evidence. You see, back in 2018, the defendant had been working as a caretaker for Ms. Lee for 10 years. She was one of America's most famous authors and had a fortune to match. Now, Ms. Lee had one family member remaining, Mr. Rogers, and feeling that they'd grown apart, she names Ms. Mars her caretaker as inheritor of her estate. Ms. Mars' work had paid off. A woman who you heard prior had just $20,000 in the bank, urgently in need of cash, would now soon have tens of millions of dollars to her name, all by the stroke of a pen. But then something changed. On July 4th, Mr. Rogers came to visit his grandmother, and when her grandson returned, it was now Mr. Rogers who spent time with Ms. Lee. They shared meals, watched movies, talked about their plans for the future, and that renewed connection was strong. Ms. Mars herself told you that it was the happiest she had ever seen Ms. Lee in her entire time as caretaker. But Ms. Lee's happiness, it came at a price for the defendant, because she knew that the closer Ms. Lee got to Mr. Rogers, the more likely it was that her assets would go to Mr. Rogers and not to the defendant. And on August 14th, those suspicions proved true. By all accounts, members of the jury, the defendant listened in on a conversation between Mr. Rogers and Ms. Lee. Now, we have heard that Mr. Rogers and Ms. Mars, had diverging accounts of that conversation. Mr. Rogers says that Ms. Lee said she would write Mr. Rogers back into the well, while Ms. Mars, she says the opposite. That conversation, members of the jury, is what this case comes down to. We know that one person heard what was said in that conversation and hatched a plan to murder Ms. Lee, and the evidence has shown that that person was the defendant. Let's first talk about knowledge. You heard that Ms. Lee had a fatal allergy to a drug called chloroanthropine. And we know that both Mr. Rogers and Ms. Mars knew about that allergy. But you also heard that the crime took a lot more than just knowing about an allergy. That poison, it wasn't dissolved in a beverage or delivered without her knowledge. The killer put it right in Ms. Lee's own hands. The killer in this case knew that both chloroanthropine and Ms. Lee's arthritis medication had exactly the same size, shape, and appearance. So much so that Ms. Lee would mistake them for her daily medication. And members of the jury, that's important because we didn't hear any evidence that Mr. Rogers had any of that knowledge. He was just Ms. Lee's grandson. The defendant, on the other hand, handled Ms. Lee's medication for 10 years and knew that both chloroanthropine and Winterin were identical. It was the defendant, and only the defendant, who knew how to set a trap that would kill Ms. Lee. And that's exactly what the forensic evidence in this case has shown. Because yes, Ms. Driscoll can attack an accomplished investigator, and Ms. Mars can accuse Mr. Rogers of this murder, but I wanted you to take Ms. Driscoll's advice from the very beginning of trial. Look a little closer. Look at the trip that the defendant took to a pharmacy that sold chloroanthropine. Look at the testimony from both of the defense's witnesses about Ms. Lee's meeting with her attorney, and look at the fingerprints on the bag and the pills. Now, members of the jury, I want to finish by talking about Ms. Mars, because she took the stand and she gave quite the performance. She told you how much she cared about Ms. Lee, how she never would have done something like this. But remember how Ms. Mars has approached this crime from the very beginning. When the police found the motive, that will, she lied. She acted surprised that she was in that will in a desperate attempt to throw the police off her trail. But she failed, and they followed that trail of evidence right back to Ms. Mars. And after seeing Ms. Mars today, I want you to ask yourself, was Ms. Mars crying when she switched out Ms. Lee's daily medication for pills she knew would kill her? Did Ms. Mars cry when she took the life of an innocent grandmother for cash? Don't fall for the defendant's tricks, members of the jury. Because Agatha Lee, she trusted Ms. Mars. She couldn't imagine that someone who she lived with for 10 years would do what Ms. Mars did, would abuse that trust and see Ms. Lee's life or death as a piggy bank to be played with. But she left a trail of evidence. She lied at the will reading. She left her fingerprints at the crime scene. She tried to take Ms. Lee's wishes into her own hands, but members of the jury, today you can give the dignity of having her wishes respected back to Ms. Lee. We ask that you do justice in this case and find Drew Mars liable. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Defense, you may proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court. Look a little closer. When you go to buy a car, there's a reason why you have to always ask the dealer to take a test drive first. Because it doesn't matter how great that dealer's sales pitch is, you won't feel confident until you've looked a little closer. When you go to buy a house, there's a reason why I always have to ask the real estate agent to take a tour first. Because it doesn't matter how perfect that house looks from the outside, you won't feel comfortable until you look a little closer. When attorneys come to court and accuse a caretaker of killing the woman she loved, there's a reason why the law places 100% of the burden on their shoulders. Because just like the car, And just like the house, you can't buy what they're selling until you look a little closer. Members of the jury, when you go back to deliberate, there are 3 things I'm going to ask you to look closely at. In each of these 3, you are going to find a plaintiff failing to meet its burden over and over because Drew Mars didn't kill Agatha Lee. That was Stevie Rogers. Number 1, let's look at motive. So we both agree that whoever wins this case gets a lot of money. That's even. But Mr. Parks just told you this case comes down to a conversation that Agatha Lee had with Stevie Rogers. That's the motive for whoever committed this crime. Now, members of the jury, if this case comes down to it, and you have Stevie Rogers saying one thing and Drew Mars saying the other, at best their case is a he said, she said, but it gets even worse than that. Because the plaintiff, the party whose job it is to prove their case, didn't call a single corroborating witness, but we did. We called Ryan Cabrera, who told you that he spoke with Agatha Lee after that conversation and confirmed Drew Mars' account of that. So now, members of the jury, the plaintiff's case becomes a he said, they said. That's not meeting any kind of burden. Number 2, let's look a little closer at who actually had the opportunity to commit this crime. All right, so let's pretend like the plaintiff actually proved their story of what that conversation was between Agatha Lee and Stevie Rogers. Well, that would mean, under their theory, that Drew Mars then became enraged and at some point went up to switch out the pills between Winterin and chloroandromine undetected. Well, he'd have to do that when nobody else was home. But it's undisputed in this case that right after that conversation, Drew Mars went with Agatha Lee out to lunch. The 2 came back a few hours later, and then Agatha Lee went to her room. Members of the jury, there was no point in time in which Drew Mars could have actually gone to the room to switch out the pills without Agatha Lee being there. Plaintiff's counsel has told you that the defendant left a trail. I guess she did. She left a trail walking straight out of the house when the crime is supposed to have occurred. But do you know who was home alone, who could have planted those pills? Well, that was Stevie Rogers. Stevie Rogers admitted she was home alone that day, or he was home alone that day. Stevie Rogers admitted he had access to the pill organizer if he wanted it. Number 3, let's look a little closer at Stevie Rogers' actions. Because members of the jury, if you find an 82-year-old woman lying in her bed who passed away in a nightgown, it's tragic. But nobody's brain immediately goes to murder. You learned today that Stevie Rogers did. From the moment Stevie Rogers saw his grandmother, he said, oh, this has to be murder. But it gets even worse. Before anyone was talking about chloroandromine, before anyone knew anything about a poisoning, Stevie Rogers said, why don't we run a toxicology screen? Stevie Rogers told the police and his paid investigator, be sure you take a picture of the pill organizer. Members of the jury, ask yourself how Stevie Rogers could have known that organizer was important if he isn't the one who planted the pill. So let's take a step back. Let's try to understand where all of this is really coming from. Well, we know that Stevie Rogers was reading a book at the time that he made all these accusations. Members of the jury, you learned that Stevie Rogers was reading his grandmother's book, where a caretaker is accused of poisoning an older wealthy person with chloroandromine. So what are the odds that while he's reading that book, it just so happens that his wealthy grandmother is poisoned with chloroandromine and he thinks to accuse the caretaker? Do you really think it's more likely than not that those 2 drugs are identical just out of coincidence? Or do you think they're identical because he got the idea for his plan from reading that book? Members of the jury, Stevie Rogers wanted to try to recreate his grandmother's great mystery novel. But you know the saying, the sequel is never as good as the original? That's true here. You see, I'm sure Agatha Lee was a great novelist. I'm sure Death in a Bottle was a great mystery book. But you have to admit, this case, it's not a great mystery. In a mystery, there should be at least 2 people who could have committed the crime. Today, we know there was only one. That was Stevie Rogers. Members of the jury, his plot is bad, and his case is even worse. This wasn't Drew Mars. And when you look a little closer, you'll see that for yourself. Find Drew Mars not liable. Thank you.
Thank you. Rebuttal.
Yes, Your Honor.
Whenever you're ready.
Can I get a brief time check?
There are about 5 minutes left.
Okay. I don't intend on using all of that, Your Honor. Members of the jury, Mr. Bestman just came up and he told you something that sounds a little bit outlandish. He brought up for what seems like the first time that the defense's contention in this case is that Stevie Rogers tried to recreate his grandmother's own mystery novel by poisoning her. But members of the jury, this isn't a sequel. This isn't fiction. This is real life. And a woman is dead. Pointing to a fictional book again and again and saying, look how similar it looks, that proves nothing. This isn't a he said, she said case or a he said, they said case. It's the defense versus the facts. Because every single piece of tangible evidence in this case has gone to show that it was Drew Mars who committed this crime. We heard the evidence about Ms. Lee's plan to set up a meeting with the attorney who handled her estate that Friday from multiple witnesses. And then the defense has the audacity to come up and say that our 2 witnesses are exactly reliable. Everything that they say is true. Well, members of the jury, we found out that both of them have millions of dollars on the line in this case. Members of the jury, all we're asking you to do is to follow the facts. To the pharmacy, back to Ms. Mars. And when you look at the forensic evidence and the testimony of the witnesses in this case, we're confident that you'll find Ms. Mars liable. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. All right, both parties have concluded. Give the judge some time to tabulate.
What I'm going to go ahead and do is stop the live stream now, and the students are going to be put back into their breakout rooms. Students, once we are ready for comments to begin, I'll bring you back in from your breakout rooms. Judges, once you've submitted your ballot, please turn on your video. I will then contact Tab Room once everybody has turned in their ballots, and that is when we'll be able to bring the students back in.